What's a small habit that quietly reveals a person lacks empathy? Story 1. Taking up more than their allotted space on an airplane, especially if they're an average-sized person. Stealing the armrest if not in the middle, spreading their legs into their neighbor's space, etc. Answer. I feel that is more because the allotted space is way too little. I will try to keep myself within my square centimeter of space, but I will not judge anybody for infringing in mine on occasion. It is almost unavoidable. Of course, there are people that just barrage into whatever and clearly have no regard for the persons next to them. But I find these are rare. Most try their best but just fail because it is darn impossible. Can't wait for mass protests to break out demanding more space on planes. No, I don't think that will actually happen. No, but a girl can dream. Story 2. Never admitting when they're wrong and get super defensive when you prove them wrong, and never apologizing. Answer. I know someone like this. She's made assumptions about things I've said or done, and if I try to correct her, I'm told you don't have to explain yourself to me. But I do, because you're wrong. She's also very good at moving the goalpost to make herself right. There's also been occasions where I've been literally telling her that I'm struggling with my mental health and need support, which she's completely ignored in favor of pushing me to admit that she's right about something that she isn't right about. Story 3. Neglecting you in conversation. Like when you share something and they immediately dismiss it and start talking about something else, usually something about themselves. Answer. This can also be a sign of neurodivergence. A common communication pattern among some is to, when learning something new about a person, to share their own information. Most people are not neurodivergent though. Some are just self-absorbed, and some neurodivergent people are harder to carry on what would be considered regular conversation with than others. Story 4. Taking it personally when a server or customer service person isn't kissing their jerk. Not being mean, just not being a bubbly goofus. Let people in service conserve their emotional energy. The American standard is too high. Answer. To be fair, I've worked in customer service for many years, and actively being nice is easy and necessary. It's also self-perpetuating, momentum building. If you can't manage it, you don't belong in customer service. I know people are desperate and will take whatever work they can get, but you don't belong there. And it isn't healthy to be somewhere you don't belong for too long. I wouldn't expect someone in a wheelchair to be a firefighter, nor would I expect an antisocial person to be in customer service. Find what's right for you. Story 5. Whenever you say something is wrong with your health or you're feeling down, that person automatically has it worse that you do, as if they have to win like it's a competition. I have an aunt like this and it's draining. Despite being relatively healthy, she's always the most sick. It's always about her. Story 6. 2 things that I've noticed with these people. 1. They don't understand or won't believe something unless they have been in the same situation themselves. It's like they cannot imagine themselves in someone else's shoes, to the point that they really don't understand. 2. They don't like to talk to you when you are in a vulnerable state. It's annoying to them when you're sick, not high energy, having an off day, etc. Toxic positivity. Story 7. Playing videos on their phone at full volume, talking loudly on the phone in a small space. Can you tell I had an annoying day in a waiting lobby? Story 8. Ignoring someone. My dad almost died last year. I raced to NC from NY to visit home in the hospital. I missed maybe 3 or 4 days of work. When I got back, my boss didn't talk to me for almost 2 weeks, never asked if my dad was okay. My friend had lost his father a few years ago. Everyone at work chipped in 50 except this same manager to help him with funeral expenses. Must have been 50 employees. In my 49 years on the planet, I have never met a more jealous, narcissistic, opinionated, dislike person. Other than his wife, he has no friends and maybe 2 family members he speaks to. Story 9. Doesn't really listen to you in conversation. Instead of listening and adding, they're just waiting to say whatever is on their mind. Story 10. I suspect my dad is a sociopath for many reasons, but some of the things that showed he had no empathy. 1. He never pitied stray animals. We are in a very poor area, and those animals sometimes wouldn't have water. He would totally ignore it, and if they approached him, he'd kick them away. 2. Never ever has he given a beggar. We live in a war area, and a lot of people have left their homes in other cities and moved to our city since it's kinda safer. He would be so angry if we give them anything. Not just money. Some things like if we had an extra pound of flour or sugar or an extra liter of oil or anything that can help them make a meal at least for a thought or night. 3. When he used to hit us, he wouldn't have any regards for our safety. He would do it like we were the enemy. Never has he regretted doing this to us or apologized for it. Story 11. How they speak about other people. If they have a massive ego and are always right and everyone else is wrong, or they lack accountability. Story 12. Immediately turning the subject back to themselves when you're telling them about a problem you're having. Story 13. A lack of gratefulness, never saying thank you, especially when someone goes out of their way to help them. Story 14. Someone who interrupts others when talking, or someone who has a quick-fire response versus listening to what the other person is saying. Story 15. Listening to music without headphones in public transport. Although empathy is too big a word for this kind of behavior, it's basically bad manners. Story 16. When they initially cannot understand either why a situation is the way it is or why another person feels a certain way. They usually will be dumbstruck and they'll vent to family and friends. People can learn how to fake sympathy, but if you can catch them initially, you'll see. Story 17. I don't know how quiet it is, but when they won't respect boundaries and act like you're a diva because you demand basic human courtesy. Story 18. Not using their turn signal. It demonstrates a lack of awareness of other people and/or disregard for their safety or inconvenience. Well, I know where I'm going. Why should I signal? Story 19. The use of just do X when someone expresses a social or emotional difficulty. It's usually unsolicited, dismissive, and rarely considers any other factors that might complicate the situation. Story 20. Sitting in the front seat of a full car on a hot day and aiming the AC vents at only themselves while the backseaters boiled. I feel like 9 times out of 10 I've had to say something before they'll aim a vent to the back. Story 21. They see a person in need or unhappy or whatever negative situation the person is in and say, well, they made that choice. Story 22. Forgetting that children's service workers, homeless people, people with different accents are human. You can tell when this is the case because people subconsciously change their way of talking and body language when addressing those they dehumanize. Story 23. I am actually not sure anymore. With neurodiversity and acceptance around that, a lot of the behaviors I previously thought were personality-related seem like they can be explained with who they are and not related to empathy. Story 24. Even though he sees that you're in a situation where you need help, He does not offer to help you without being asked. Story 25. People who litter or smoke in front of signs that say no smoking, people who don't give you a thank you, wave when you let them in traffic, people who walk straight into an elevator before you have had a chance to get out, people who are mean to anything innocent and vulnerable, children, animals. Story 26. When you say you're sick, the first thing they say is, "Stay away from me," instead of showing any concern for your health. Story 27. Being constantly late to things. I get it can happen sometimes and that it's a challenge for some, but if it's consistent, it just makes me feel like they don't care about my time or how having to wait every time impacts me. Story 28. Calling just to see how you are when they really just want to unload on you and want someone to talk. And again, please don't ask if you don't actually care. My sister recently called me to ask about how a hard situation I am going through is. Sweet, right? Well, when I started to tell her about it, she said, "You don't have to go into all that," and change the subject to herself. I wish I could say I was surprised. Story 29. When you hold the door open for someone at a gas station because their hands are full and they don't say thank you, they just walk through as though it is expected. Story 30. When you tell your friend something that would require them to show they care and they just stare at you and say nothing. Story 31. Interrupting someone mid-sentence to talk about themselves, then never circling back to ask what the other person was saying. Story 32. Casually doubting or dismissing people's lived experiences out of habit. My MIL is a textbook narcissist and assumes people are lying or looking for attention anytime they share something even remotely negative. And of course, anything that ain't 100 sunshine and rainbows is automatically negative. If someone has a headache, she's rolling her eyes and saying it's not that bad. If someone is in the ER with a health problem, it's a waste of time because they're probably just being dramatic and overreacting. If a person is broke, they just need to budget better. If a person is struggling to find a job, it's because they're not trying hard enough. That sort of thing. It's always their fault 100 of the time, and they're always a ridiculous human being for having the audacity to speak about their problems out loud. She's just the worst kind of invalidating jackass of a person. Story 33. Assumes the worst about people. If someone does something bad, they are automatically a bad person. Always grabs the biggest piece of pizza for themselves. Story 34. Tips very little. Actively dislike children. I don't mean they want to be child-free, but have a legit loathing for children and pets. Story 35. If a person is very involved in animal rights-related causes, pay close attention to how they relate to human issues in comparison. Animal rights causes are, obviously, valid and extremely important, but some empathy challenge people use them to hide their reluctance to relate to humans. Story 36. My answer is how. When you ask people this question, a solid chunk of them just describe things that are common experiences for the disabled. Ironically, half of these replies are by people with no empathy for those prone to social isolation and having the wrong conversation pattern look on their face because they're autistic or disabled or who had to cut off large amounts of people or just fudge foreigners. Something that people who lack empathy for others do is imagine that others can read their minds and have their lives and couldn't possibly have a reason for being weird aside for being bad people, then feel offended or weirded out when everyone else's social behavior or backstory doesn't conform to niche expectations about how you should look or how often you should bring up X topic that were never communicated. Story 37. It's always about them. I can bet most of these people would be crashing out so hard if they were treated the same way they treat others. They don't realize shoot until it comes to them. Story 38. For me, it starts with the small things like not saying thank you, sorry, and excuse me. Some people belittle the impact of those words, but it actually reveals a lot about your personality. Story 39. Nothing more irritating than watching someone drop clothes off a hanger while shopping, glance at it, and just keep digging like it's not their mess. Story 40. Cutting people off when they're talking, especially when they're opening up or sharing something personal. Story 41. Not slowing down your pace to match the person you're walking with, leaving them to walk several paces behind you. If you know, you know. This happens so often, and there is a pattern. Story 42. Consistently interrupting others when they speak, it shows they are more focused on expressing themselves than listening or understanding what someone else is feeling or trying to say. Story 43. Leaves the shopping cart wherever they feel like in the lot or the store itself without returning to where it's supposed to go. Story 44. Easy. Littering. Leaving toilets unclean after dirtying them. Other small stuff like that. They simply don't care about the welfare of others who come next. Story 45. A man who is the only male in the family with wife and daughter and never puts the toilet seat back down after taking a piss. Story 46. Talking over people, especially when they're upset, like they don't even notice or care what the other person feels. Story 47. Never picking up their dog's poop because apparently they think the poop fairy exists and everyone else should just deal with stepping in their pet's digestive consequences. Story 48. Always criticizing others, not trying to think about why they could be doing that if they have a reason for it. Being mean in general to people simply for existing differently than them. Story 49. When they are cooked for repeatedly amazing meals and don't do the dishes ever, not even their own plate. I'm old school with a galley kitchen in a tiny house. There is no dishwasher besides my own hands and fortitude. Washing the dishes is the balance of being fed, and I've done most of the cleaning up while cooking, as it's the only way a kitchen works. Why the fudge can't they see the effort and offer something to help? Story 50. When they make jokes at your expense and try and belittle you in a group setting, but are very nice to you when it's only you two, like they're a completely different person. Story 51. Traveling to different countries and assuming they all operate the same as your home country, not educating themselves on local culture, etc. I used to live in Japan, and so many tourists would come playing videos out loud on the train, yelling at each other across the car or blocking escalators when you can clearly see people lining up on one side and walking the other. Story 52. Doesn't put their shopping cart back. They never see the direct result of their negligence, which is almost always why they don't bother. Story 53. Para darte cuenta de un pequeño hábito, es decir, solo uno. Y si es un hábito, es alguien con quien normalmente convives, es decir, comparten un espacio y un tiempo. Y tiene que ser pequeño, podrá ser alguien que cierra con fuerza la puerta de un auto ajeno, nunca dejan propina en ningún lugar, no dan el paso ni en tráfico ni a transeúntes. Si quedan a deber una cantidad prometen pagarlo y no lo hacen. No comparten de su lonche a compañeros que por alguna razón tienen carencia, tiran cosas buenas en vez de regalar o donar, aparcan en espacio para discapacitados, no ceden asiento a mujeres embarazadas o abuelitos, etc. Si me equivoco pueden corregir, solo es lo que creo, más no tengo bases sólidas. Story 54. Squashing bugs or eliminate small animals without second thought. Like, you didn't consider at all how it felt? Story 55. Leaving their shopping cart in the middle of an empty spot or hopping it up on a curb instead of returning it to the cart corral. Story 56. If and even if they ask a question about yourself, to only stamp on your answer less than a sentence or two in to talk about themselves. Story 57. Sorta not staying on the right side, or WTV is the designated passing side in your nation, shows a lack of awareness which emo is often rooted in empathy. Story 58. Interrupting people consistently. And you can see that even if they aren't talking, they are just waiting for you to finish your sentence in order to say what they want to say, not actively listening to you, period. Story 59. Someone who can only banter and turns everything into a joke. They will get subtly distant and even passive-aggressive or hostile if someone shows vulnerability. Story 60. When someone constantly interrupts, it's such a small thing, but it quietly says that what they say matters more than what you're feeling or trying to express. And honestly, most people who do it don't even realize it. It's not always mean-spirited. Sometimes it's just self-centered energy sneaking through. Story 61. Someone who acts extremely hostile or dismissive when confronted by person A about their behavior and continues to treat person A that way. But then they fix said behavior as soon as they start seeing person B. Story 62. They will vent all the time about every little thing that happens to them. My dad has the unfortunate habit of saying things out of pocket like, those judges should be taken out back and shot for supporting these political jargon. Like, it's honestly just depressing to be around him, since every person is somehow wronging him and should be eliminated for it or something against America or whatever else. He just has so little self-awareness for the good things in his life. I try to do a switch up and ask him things like, what's one positive aspect you like about blank? Sometimes he has a nice answer. So it's not like he's completely void of any empathy or caring. It's just buried under the constant doom-scroller mindset that has taken the best version of my dad away from me. Story 63. When you are sitting and they are standing behind you and start talking to you without making an effort to move, where you don't have to turn your neck to look at them as they talk. Story 64. Talking a lot about themselves, but when another person talks, they are impatient or irritated, don't make eye contact or look around the room. Other people's inner lives bore them. They have no interest at all. Story 65. Someone who always starts the sentence off with, no, it's, you're wrong, it's, pretty much whatever you say. They tell you that you're wrong first, before they even have time to craft a response in their head. They discredit your opinion immediately, even if you didn't ask for their opinion. It might just be more of a respect thing if they don't do it to other people, though. Story 66. Receive a compliment and not even trying to say thank you or even try to find a polite comeback line. Like, especially if you get compliments often, then you are probably not parent material. Story 67. Placing your smaller backpacks in the overhead bin rather than below the seat in front of you, especially as soon as you enter, knowing it's a full flight. Story 68. Always talking over people. Might not seem like a big deal, but it kinda shows they're not really tuned into how others feel. Story 69. Sitting down on a bus, on their own with a small handbag next to them on the empty seat next to the window. Usually at the times when everyone knows the bus is going to be packed. They should pay for using the extra seat. Story 70. Consistently interrupting or one-upping someone during a vulnerable moment, like when someone shares something emotional or painful and the other person goes, "Oh, that's nothing," one time, I then proceeds to hijack the conversation. It's a small habit, but it quietly shows they're more focused on their own story than the feelings in front of them. Story 71. Telling you to stop what you're doing and look at them when they're talking. There's showing respect. And then there's being demanded respect at usually the worst possible time. And at that point, no amount of eye contact is going to make folks listen. They're more focused on all the work they're going to have to rush and finish later once that is all over. Anyone who doesn't do that is at least respectful of the fact that people can still listen. They just might not be as responsive due to multitasking. Story 72. When someone constantly talks over others or never asks how you're doing, it shows they're more focused on themselves than anyone else. Story 73. Some small habits a person might score low on the effective empathy scale. Noisy eating, drinking. Lack of consideration of others' time. Most people can fake empathy in a conversation so long they're not distracted, emotionally charged, or stressed. As for those who don't, some people lack social skills, some lack empathy. There are many other signs, but they're not necessarily small habits as one might understand the meaning of that. I consider leaving carts and using a speakerphone in public a rather grand gesture rather than a small habit. Story 74. As someone with a 98100 compassion score on the OCM personality assessment, I always find that people who lack empathy for others firstly lack it for themselves too. Not making excuses for any behavior, just wanted to point out you can't separate empathy into two pieces, inward and outward. You either repress it or let it be. Disclaimer: I'm a writer with zero clinical experience. Story 75. Just fudge eating with their mouth open, like Jesus Christ. We all know that it's rude as hell and disgusting. And yet, you choose to do that for absolutely no reason, because you just don't care what other people think. Story 76. To be honest, it's tough. My empathy is pretty low. Autism spectrum. Aside from my immediate family, I don't really feel much for anyone. I'm pretty good at masking it and coming up with stuff a normal person would respond with, and I act normally in public. Story 77. Getting angry at literally everything but never make efforts to understand why, and acting like they have to bear the burden of everything. Story 78. Using the quote, "I would never do that. How can they do that? You can't see what other people's perspective is." Always a red flag when someone says that. Story 79. Talking over you when you are mid-sentence, and instead of apologizing and self-correcting, the person interrupting just keeps talking with their point. Absolute psychos. My family used to do this all the time. I don't have any contact with any of them anymore. Story 80. They show no emotion when someone passes away. It's like they don't care because it's not them, so not their problem. Story 81. Not returning a grocery cart to the correct location. Y'all know someone else dreads having to clean up after you, right? Story 82. If they are mean or disrespectful to old people for no reason. Had a friend who literally pushed an elderly man out of his way just to enter a store. Friendship ended that very day. Story 83. Not being able to hold space for someone else, changing the subject quickly when someone else shares things. Story 84. Saying just being honest. Yeah, right. If you are honest, you will explain it better. For example, I know how this feels. I'm here for you, therefore. Unfortunately, I disagree. I believe. Well, you get the point. Story 85. Not slowing down when approaching a zebra crossing in their car. Have a particularly tricky spot crossing the road at a bus stop. It's amazing how many drivers flap their arms or make rude gestures when they are clearly in the wrong. Story 86. Speakerphone in public places I find very rude and intrusive. Also, I really dislike when in company a person starts sharing a reels or video with one other. Totally insular. Story 87. This isn't a proper answer as you're looking for something that actually reveals it to others, but I've always thought whether or not someone picks up their dog's poo even when there's nobody around is probably a reasonable predictor of empathy levels. Story 88. Being a narcissist, they always brag about their own skills or achievements in every conversation they have. Story 89. A subtle habit that can reveal a lack of empathy is frequently interrupting or dominating conversations, especially when someone is sharing a personal experience or expressing emotions. Story 90. Someone who insists to pay the check at restaurants and swipe their credit card for points and not let others split the bill or use their card. Story 91. Talking over people when they're clearly upset. It's such a small thing, but it shows they're more focused on being heard than actually hearing you. Story 92. They don't wait for your response to what they've just said when you're having a conversation with them. It's hard to